The march towards liberty starts now. This is Freedom Watch. Tonight on the docket, the American people are screaming loud and clear about big government. Gallup just asked Americans about the greatest threat to the future of the country. The pollsters came back with some results that would astonish big government Republicans and big government Democrats. 64% of Americans, a near record, say big government is the biggest threat to the future. Not big business, not big labor, big government. An astounding 48% of Democrats agree with large pluralities of libertarian Republicans and independents. Big government is the biggest threat to personal freedom. That's a sharp spike from President Obama's first few months in office. Democrats have no choice but to grow impatient when the president spews big government nonsense like this.
However many jobs might be generated by a Keystone pipeline, there are going to be a lot fewer than the jobs that are created by extending the payroll tax cut and extending unemployment insurance.
It is just ridiculous to suggest that paying people not to work creates jobs. Some might even say it's an out-and-out lie. The president should know better. But it is no better for Republicans. They're forced to choose between Newt Romney. Newt Gingrich claims FDR is America's greatest president. And as we'll discuss with Ayn Rand Institute's Yaron Brook later in the show, it sounds like he wants to redistribute Mitt Romney's wealth. And Romney calls himself a progressive. Congressman Ron Paul, on the other hand, stands for limited government. And he gets largely ignored by big government-loving liberal media. Despite that, the latest Iowa poll has Ron Paul in a statistical tie for first place with Newt Gingrich 3 weeks before the caucuses. You get the picture? We're sure our next guest does, because he's a prominent big government Democrat who must see what those 48% of Democrats who fear big government are trying to tell the president and are trying to tell him. Congressman Charlie Rangel, my favorite big government Democrat, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Good to be with you, Judge. You know, if you really are doing pretty well,
thank you.
Then you think that big government is okay. You know, there were Republicans and Democrats who were able to get the GI Bill. They had no problem with big government.
Well, wait a minute.
I'm just telling you.
I understand.
Of course, when you find so many people without work, without jobs, without hope, you bet your life they have to blame somebody.
But 64% of voters, this is a Gallup poll, it's a neutral poll, Congressman Rangel, and 48% of Democrats, it's almost half of Democrats, are saying big government is the problem. And the president is saying, instead of letting people keep more dollars to invest, instead of letting a private company build a pipeline from Canada to Texas to get oil through the pipeline, we should extend unemployment insurance. Somehow that's going to create jobs. I'm not without heart and feeling for people that are out of work, but that's not going to boost the economy, Charlie.
May it please the court.
It does please the court. You got the gavel
and you got the bench. We talk about two different things. If you believe in compassion, we're not just talking about people in the middle class going into poverty. We're talking about people who've lost their job through no fault of their own. As a matter of fact, it was big business that screwed up the whole thing, that caused a collapse in the fiscal integrity of the United States, that put millions of people out of work. And all we're saying is that they should have unemployment compensation, especially during this time of the year, and they should have disposable income to buy goods and services from small businesses. Now you tell me that it's connected with a big energy pipeline, a big oil pipeline. Let's deal with that separately, but don't hold the American people hostage.
Let me ask you to
don't hold the hostage because you want to have a pipeline.
No, I don't particularly. I don't think the government should have anything to do with the pipeline. The people who own the dirt on which the pipeline is going to be built and the people who are going to invest in the pipeline should make the decision. But in this country, decisions of this magnitude have to go through the White House because we're halfway to socialism. Put this aside. right. Take off your hat as a Democrat, please. Put on your hat as someone who knows the House of Representatives better than almost anybody else now living. What is going to happen, Congressman Rangel? The government will be without authority to operate in 3 days on Friday. Will another continuing resolution be enacted? Will we get a real budget? What will happen at the end of the week?
I tell you one thing that could happen. I just met a gentleman before I came on your show. I said, what you doing here in Washington? He said, checking up to see what the heck it is that gridlocks the Congress. And I told him, and I'm telling you, that if enough people was concerned like he was, not to come to Washington, but to call up to find out who their member is. I've taken off my Democratic hat, and I don't care whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. I don't care whether you're for pipelines or whether you're for unemployment compensation. If you care, you will not wait until the election, but call up your member of Congress now and say, I'm mad as hell. I don't like big government. I elected you to make certain that I get service.
Did I hear you say that your constituents don't like big government? You are the personification of big government, Charlie Rangel.
I did not listen. No one is against big government.
I'm against big government.
No, you're not. Well, you may be, but if you didn't have Medicare, if you didn't have a military that's prepared to defend this country, if you didn't have a big government in order to provide research and development so that you can enjoy.
If you didn't collect $1 trillion and spend $2.5.
If you didn't have the big government for trade so that we'll be able to enhance our exports, you know, big government depends on which side and what you're talking about.
All right, Charlie.
So you don't want small government. If
I got one last question for you.
You don't want small government.
One last question for you, Congressman Rangel. Which Republican does the White House fear the most as the head of the Republican ticket next year?
What we have to do is not worry about which Republican.
Oh, come on, just give me an answer. Which Republican does the White House fear the most?
We don't fear any of the candidates. We fear the American people would lose hope because we got to make certain they go back to work.
All right.
Our job is not Republicans. As a matter of fact, the Republicans that I've seen out there, sometimes I turn on the TV.
Charlie, this is not a speech to your constituents, but we love you anyway. Thanks for joining us, Congressman Rangel.
Thank you so much,
You're
Judge.
always welcome here, even if you don't make any sense. God bless you. As you just heard, thank you, Congressman Rangel.
All about, Judge.
Thank you. As you just heard, 64% say big government is the single greatest threat to America. And Republican presidential candidate Newt Gingrich is a self-professed big government Republican, conservative, progressive.
Glenn Beck, now, he actually the other day called you a progressive on Fox Business Channel. What do you say to that sort of claim?
Well,
okay.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on what standard you're using, you know.
My standard equates progressives with liberals, and it's possible that voters in Iowa agree because according to a new poll, the race is tightening there very quickly. Ron Paul is in a statistical dead heat with Newt Gingrich. Mitt Romney still lags behind at 16%. One of America's leading pollster, my friend and colleague, Democratic analyst Doug Schoen, joins us now. Back to Charlie Rangel for a second. Which Republican does the White House fear the most?
At this point, they fear Romney the most, but as his numbers erode and as Newt Gingrich looks stronger and stronger, I think the White House is going to turn their attention to him.
What does Newt Gingrich gain in the Republican caucuses in Iowa and primaries in New Hampshire when he praises FDR as the greatest American president and says that he is himself a big government, that is Gingrich, progressive?
Well, that's not the message that caucus goers in Iowa or primary voters in New Hampshire want to hear. That's for sure.
Why does he say it? Does he have a tendency just to say things off the top of his head without thinking about the effect of them?
Newt's greatest strength is his intellect. His greatest weakness is his lack of discipline.
All right. Are you surprised at the polls that came out today that show Ron Paul and Newt Gingrich in a statistical dead heat in Iowa? That's a loss of 9 points for Gingrich since late last week, in the past 5 days, counting the 2 days of the weekend.
Well, given that Ron Paul's running tough negative ads against Gingrich, I'm not entirely surprised. This is the first poll of what will be many before the caucus, and I think we need to see if it's confirmed by other polls. But when you run $1 million in negative ads, anything can happen.
My colleague Glenn Beck came out this morning and said if Newt Gingrich is the nominee, Beck, will encourage Ron Paul to run for a third-party ticket. Do you think a lot of small government constitutionalists, libertarian Republicans, I'm using various terminology to describe us, would feel the same way?
I think the polls bear it out, Judge. In the last Wall Street Journal poll, 18% said that they would vote for Ron Paul as an independent against Gingrich or Romney and President Obama.
If that number is accurate, if it holds out, no Republican could win if most of those votes came from Republicans.
That is absolutely true.
Or would some of them come from the Ralph Nader, Occupy Wall Street crowd that wants to end the wars and end the Fed?
Well, I think some would. I have a libertarian doctor who's much more left than he is right, who's for Ron Paul.
All right. What happens if Ron Paul does win in Iowa? Does that give him a boost in New Hampshire, or does it raise the bar for him in New Hampshire?
I think it does both. I think he'll get a boost, but I also think that there'll be enhanced scrutiny of him. And in New Hampshire, unlike Iowa, independents can vote. And that's a tougher constituency for Ron Paul.
Give me your gut feeling. Can Gingrich maintain a lead, or are we seeing the beginning of the end of the Gingrich candidate with this precipitous fall of 9 points in 5 days?
I would say this is one poll. I think that Gingrich can maintain a lead. Whether he will is a different question. The enthusiasm certainly is with Ron Paul, and Gingrich doesn't have a turnout operation. That's the real issue.
Gingrich cannot seriously claim he's an outsider, can he?
He's trying.
Will it be successful, Doug Schoen?
Well, he is somebody who is more of an outsider than Mitt Romney, who appeals mostly to bundlers and hedge fund types.
All right, but he's been in the government for 30 years. Doug Schoen, always a pleasure.
Judge,
thank you for joining us. While America starts to pay attention to who might be her next president, Congress is busy bringing the government to the verge of another shutdown, this time over payroll taxes on a pipeline. We played President Obama's views on this earlier. He says welfare is a better way to create jobs than building a pipeline to bring cheap energy from a friendly neighbor. Idaho Republican Tea Party Congressman Raul Labrador, who profoundly disagrees with the president, joins us now with his view. Congressman Labrador, it's always a pleasure. You know that. You're always welcome at Freedom Watch, and we're glad you're here.
It's great to be on your show.
What will happen at the end of this week? Will the government close down on Friday night? Will there be another sort of ridiculous kick the can down the road for another month, a continuing resolution? Or will we, from out of the heavens, get a budget that the White House, the Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives can agree to?
You know, Judge, the irony is that the House, the Senate, and the White House have already agreed on a budget. And the problem is that the president is now saying that he's going to he's going to veto any bill that comes out of the House that deals with the Keystone Pipeline or anything that deals with Boiler Mac or any of these other things that actually creates jobs. So what he's saying is that it's more important to him to actually deal with his base than it is to actually create jobs in the United States. And we need to actually have a fight with him. It's about time that our leadership, and I think our leadership is ready to do this, to tell the president, this is our bill, this is what we stand for, this is what the American people sent us here to Washington, D.C. to do, and that we're actually going to have a fight about it.
Congressman Labrador, let me ask you about the pipeline. Its plan is to be constructed by a private corporation using money invested in that corporation by private investors, and it's going to be built on private property or on state-owned lands. What business is that of the federal government? Why does the President of the United States have the final say on whether a private company can build a pipeline from Canada to Texas where there's a demand for it?
You know, it's outrageous is the way the law was drafted. But what's really interesting about the pipeline, in Idaho, we don't have a lot of jobs that have anything to do with the pipeline. But I've talked to a couple of my friends here from other areas. I have a friend from Florida who says that there's already 300 jobs that were lost because of the president not making a decision on the pipeline. Not jobs that are going to be lost, but jobs that have already been lost because these companies that are working on this project are actually laying off people because the pipeline is not moving forward. This president claims that he wants us to act on jobs right now. Well, we're acting on jobs at this moment, and he's refusing to work with us.
Congressman Labrador, switching gears, one of the other votes you'll be asked to take before the week is out is on the defense authorization bill, which basically will fund the Pentagon for another year. tucked in there is language that would permit the President of the United States of America to use the military in our streets for ordinary law enforcement purposes, even to arrest Americans who, in the President's opinion, are not worthy of due process, to ship them to Cuba and to deny them due process. Can Republicans, can you, Raul Labrador, can anybody who took an oath to uphold the Constitution possibly support that?
I don't think so. And I think, as you know, Justin Amash, congressman from Michigan, has written a letter to the appropriators saying that he wants that language out of there. I joined him in signing that letter. And the irony here is that I think the President of the United States has also asked for that language to be taken away. So the President doesn't want it. He has said that he will veto the bill if it comes with that language. And I think we should take that language out of the appropriations bill. I think it's important for us to not just defend our nation, but defend the Constitution and defend our civil liberties.
Congressman Labrador, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The revolution continues right here on Freedom Watch. Still not sure yet that Newt Gingrich is a big government progressive? Listen to this.
If Governor Romney would like to give back all the money he's earned from bankrupting companies and laying off employees over his years at Bain, that I would be glad to then listen to him.
The Ayn Rand Institute's Yaron Brook answers the question. Isn't that an attack you'd expect from a socialist, not from a Republican presidential candidate who believes in the free market? Then, the unthinkable is already happening. A bank run begins in Europe. British renegade politician Nigel Farage says it will happen here next if the government continues to violate these principles. That government is best which governs least. The people are entitled to a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. The Constitution was written to keep the government off the people's backs. These stories and more, only on Freedom Watch. Stay with us. These are strange times. Two of the leading GOP presidential hopefuls are sounding like anti-capitalists. Newt Gingrich is accusing Mitt Romney of laying off workers and bankrupting companies when Romney ran a company called Bain Capital, a private equity firm. Romney is bashing Gingrich for taking money from Freddie Mac. Is it smart for Newt Romney to go anti-capitalist at this stage of the race? Who better to ask than the president of the Ayn Rand Center for Individual Rights, perhaps the fiercest defender of capitalism in all the land. Good friend of the show, Yaron Brook. Yaron, it's a pleasure. Welcome here. First, I don't understand politically what either of them would gain with a basically conservative, traditionalist, Republican primary voting audience by bashing capitalism.
Unfortunately, even the Republican audience, even that primary audience, is very populist. You know, we don't have a grassroots, real pro-capitalist populace out there. If we did, maybe we'd have better candidates than what we've got out there.
Well, you could probably argue that Ron Paul fits that role. I know you disagree with him on foreign affairs, but we're just talking about the economy.
Sure, but I think that Ron Paul gets a lot of his support. The reason he gets the numbers that he does, I think a lot of that comes from his foreign policy views. I think he gets a lot from kind of the radical left, not just the radical right. But yeah, there is a constituency that's truly pro-capitalist. Maybe among the Republican primaries it's 10, 15, maybe it's even 20%. But that's about it. It's not more than that. Unfortunately.
What would you, a fierce defender of pure capitalism, and you know I am with you on that,
sure,
what would you do if it is Romney versus Obama, or if it is Gingrich versus Obama? What would you advise other libertarians, capitalists, defenders of the free market, constitutionalists, small government people to do? How would you advise them to vote?
First, we should complain bitterly. We should bitch and complain and attack the Republicans. Unfortunately, I think the priority has to be to get rid of Obama. I think Obama, in the short term, is a disaster.
All right, you're going to take the anybody but Obama argument and then try and work with that person?
Almost anybody but Obama principle. You know, it's going to be hard. Hold your nose. It's going to be definitely a hold your nose. But look, the country's in a bad place. It's not only in a bad place politically in terms of the politicians we have. It's in a bad place philosophically in terms of the American people and what they think and what they believe. And these are the choices. They're not accidental. These are the choices that our culture has provided.
What do you mean they're not accidental? Why is it that if it is Newt Gingrich, both candidates, Obama and Gingrich, will idolize Teddy Roosevelt, the biggest nanny-stater, the biggest central planner in the history of the White House?
Because the American people, while even the Tea Party, while they claim they want smaller government, while they claim they want less regulations, when it comes to specifics, When it comes to
They want
the
their
details,
piece of the pie?
They want paternalism. They want government overseeing their kids' toys. They want their Social Security. And, the country is not there yet. This is why the real battle that we are fighting is an educational battle. It's to educate the American people about what freedom really means.
All right, that's what you spend your life's work doing. But is it hopeless for people like those watching us now and me to believe that we can have small government that resides within the Constitution again? Is that hopeless?
No, but it's not a short-term thing. It's hopeless in the next 4-8 years. This is why, I think shows like your show, the stuff that we're doing, I see huge growth. I see huge growth in interest in these ideas, in the passion around these ideas, in the activism around these ideas. And I believe that give us 4 years, give us 8 years, give us 12 years. I don't think we're going to get quite the small government me and you would like to see. Maybe that's for another generation. But I believe that in our lifetime, we will see movement in that direction.
Okay.
But it's a long-term educational battle. Politics is short-term, and we're going to have to hold our noses and live with it.
You're more optimistic than I am, and my hat is off to you. You're Ron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Does President Obama want to help Europe or blame Europe? An impassioned freedom fighter from across the pond joins us next. President Obama now has a great dilemma on his hands, one of many, but thanks to Europe, Wall Street analysts believe we're heading deeper into a great recession, just in time for the 2012 election. Since a lousy economy here is bad for President Obama's re-election, the White House is busy trying to find ways to prop up, of all people, the European socialists. Since his options are limited, the president is blaming Europe for his economic failures here at home. Our next guest is on the battle lines against European socialism, if ever anybody was. And he's worried unelected bureaucrats on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean will stop at nothing to hold on to power. Nigel Farage, a conservative member of the European Parliament, joins us now. Nigel, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you very much.
What is the biggest worry that the average American voter should have that the President of the United States and some of his socialist buddies in Europe might do in the next couple of months?
Well, we've got this project called the Euro, where they've tried to take very different economies and force them together into one economic and monetary union. Not surprisingly, of course, it's failing, because Greece and Portugal and Ireland and Spain and possibly Italy too do not fit in the same economic straitjacket that Germany and France do. And what you guys are doing, and perhaps Obama's not telling you this, is you are pumping potentially tens of billions of dollars through the Washington-based IMF into a bailout fund that says to these indebted countries, you can't pay your debts at the moment, so what we're going to do is to lend you even more money. So you guys are in this up to your necks as well.
I would even suggest it might be worse than you have described it, Nigel, because you are doing it in a very gentlemanly way. The Congress of the United States gave the Secretary of the Treasury, who was an economic crackpot, a check for $100 billion. He could very well be putting that into the IMF, and we wouldn't even know it, because the IMF doesn't even have to tell us how they spend the money. Am I right?
Well, that's right. And I mean, do remember that whatever the IMF does spend on this loopy project, trying to support a currency that is going to fail in the end anyway, remember that 18% of that money comes from you guys in the States. And I feel that America has got involved with propping up this ridiculous failing project without any democratic debate taking place in Washington whatsoever.
Your Prime Minister, David Cameron, has basically said to the Europeans, Europe's problems belong to Europe. Don't look to us to help you. But he's under some pressure from some of the elites in Great Britain, even some in his own party, who want Great Britain to send even more than the millions of pounds a day it already sends to the socialists in Europe. What do you say to Mr. Cameron when he resists them?
Well, I mean, Mr. Cameron did resist last Friday because they put in front of him a totally impossible set of demands. So he said no to us being part of this new treaty. But where we are today in Britain is we're still part of a union that costs us £50 million a day. We're still part of a union that makes 75% of our laws. We're still part of a union that is bad for business, that is bad for enterprise, that is bad for ambition. And what I say to Mr. Cameron is, look, you know, we're stuck now as piggy in the middle. the halfway house. We now have the worst of all worlds, where these institutions, these people who clearly hate us now, and we've seen that today in the European Parliament, can now dictate what happens to us, and what we need is a referendum so that we can break free of this whole nonsense and get back to running our own country.
You are also part of a union that's bad for personal freedom. Nigel Farage, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The TSA turns into the fashion police with results that violate the Constitution as well as good taste. Plus, the China bubble may be popping. Why that might be the best thing for stopping big government here at home. That's next. The TSA is the picture of thuggish incompetence. 17-year-old Vanessa Gibbs was trying to board a flight in Norfolk, Virginia, but she was stopped at security by a TSA agent. What threat did the young woman pose? She was carrying a purse with the image of a gun embroidered on the surface of the purse. Miss Gibbs had carried this same purse on her outbound flight from Jacksonville, Florida, without any trouble from the TSA agents there. But on her way back through Norfolk, the TSA fashion police detained her. After the TSA determined that this embroidered image was not, in fact, a real gun, they forced her to check it in her luggage or turn it over. By the time Cousin Janet's goons had completed their assault on this young woman, Miss Gibbs had missed her flight. Welcome to Big Brother at American airports. Here's a pop quiz. Are the gentlemen in this photograph soldiers of the United States Army or of a foreign army? Answer, they are in fact neither. They are police officers from the Montgomery County, Texas Sheriff's Department, posing with their latest toy, an unmanned aerial drone. Drones are typically used by military forces to conduct surveillance on the enemy over foreign lands. But now police departments across the country are trying to acquire similar aircraft to conduct surveillance on the American people. It's all part of the disturbing trend in law enforcement towards militarization, moving away from a local force of peace officers who are part of the community they serve and into a military outfit that views people as subjects or worse, enemies. If you harbor any doubts about this trend, look at that picture again and ask yourself why a cop would need to dress in army fatigues and carry a machine gun in Texas. And here's yet another reason never to trust the name that lawmakers give to a certain piece of legislation. When lawmakers introduced the Stop Online Piracy Act, the intent of the law seemed fairly clear: to discourage the intellectual property theft that occurs when websites play unauthorized copies of popular films and music. But dig a little deeper, and you'll find that this bill would grant the feds sweeping new and unconstitutional powers, effectively amounting to a domestic kill switch in the hands of the United States government. This bill would give the government the power to shut down any website on the strength of an accusation alone that the website used someone else's copyrighted material without permission. The government would also be able to charge anyone who advertises on the website as a co-conspirator, effectively cutting off the website's revenue. Again, under this bill, the government doesn't have to prove anything to do this. All it would need to do is accuse the website of wrongdoing. America, we cannot let this bill become the law of the land. Does the 21st century belong to China? Economic indicators and our next guest say not so fast. China may be more hot air than fire breather. If China pops, will the money stop coming to our big spending government? Jordan Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and one of America's foremost experts on the Chinese government and its economy, joins us now. Gordon, it's a pleasure. Welcome here. In a nutshell, what should the average person viewing us now fear about China today in December 2011?
The thing that I worry about is that economic failure in China is going to lead the Communist Party to be even more belligerent. Since the end of 2009, China has been taking on all of its neighbors and the United States. And I'm worried that if the economy just sort of fails, and it looks like it's doing that now, the party is basically going to try to use nationalism to bolster its legitimacy.
All right, so your fear is that China will become belligerent and militaristic and may use the military to obtain what its economic resources have been unable to obtain.
Yeah, basically that. I mean, because really what we've seen right now over the last, let's say, year or so is the military running its own foreign policy in Beijing. Civilians no longer control it, which which means that the generals and admirals are doing what they want. And a lot of what they're doing and what they want to do just is really very destructive of peace.
All right. Well, what are they doing that's so destructive of peace? I mean, they're not in New York Harbor. They're not at Pearl Harbor. They're not in San Francisco Bay, are they?
No, but they're challenging the U.S. Navy on international waters. So, for instance, in March 2009, they actually harassed one of our vessels. They tried to steal its towed sonar array. That was a direct attack on the United States. They've been attacking our satellites with lasers. And, of course, every day there are hundreds of thousands of cyber attacks on the Pentagon and defense contractors.
And these are waged by the Chinese military.
And the Ministry of State Security.
All right. Getting back to the economy, why is it that we all believe that somehow the Chinese are more frugal, that they save more money, that their economy works better? Because they're able to acquire $1 trillion worth of our debt.
Yeah, and yeah, 3.2 trillion in foreign exchange reserves in total. But that's because they have been applying the biggest stimulus program in history. In 2009, they dumped 1.1 trillion into a then $4.3 trillion economy. So they created growth, but they also created a property bubble, stock market bubble, inflation, you name it.
All right, don't they do some things that are good for us? For example, solar panels. I don't want to talk about Solyndra, but solar panels in general. The Chinese make them better and they make them less expensive. And I don't hear any Americans complaining, oh, these things don't cost enough.
Well, I think what happened, though, is that they're using subsidies to do that. And by using subsidies, they're putting American manufacturers of these panels out of work. So essentially, it's good we can get them cheap, but we're really paying a big cost for that.
What would you do if you were the President of the United States today with respect to China? Or what would you advise Ron Paul or Newt Gingrich or Mitt Romney to do?
You know, the first thing, we need to have some honest conversations about what the Chinese are doing. They sort of treat us as an enemy. Their flag officers talk about waging war on the United States within 5-year time. And what we say to them is, oh, you know, we're very friendly.
Borrow some more
you.
money from us. All right. Gordon Chang, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. The 140 lawmakers signing on to the Stock Act want you to believe they're really ready to end insider trading on Capitol Hill. My freedom fighters are fired up by this latest big government bait and switch. They're here and they're next. Debate over expiring long-term unemployment benefits is getting very personal on Capitol Hill tonight. Republican lawmakers trying to scale back the 99 weeks of paid unemployment currently offered to the nation's jobless got a sharp rebuke from leading Democrats, with one calling the GOP proposal, quote, heartless, mindless, and reckless. Big government loves to tug at heartstrings, but does it do any good for creating jobs? Here now to discuss with my freedom fighters, Fox business anchor and my colleague Shibani Joshi, Carolyn Heldman, Occidental College political science professor, and Benjamin Powell, Suffolk University economics professor and Independent Institute senior fellow. All right, Carolyn, I'm going to start with you. I suppose you want to extend the unemployment from 99 weeks to 200 weeks, right?
Judge, I want to go even further than that. I would love to take advantage of this opportunity with so many unemployed individuals, most of whom lack college degrees because that's where the unemployment is most concentrated, and give them stipended job training in math, science, and healthcare, because we have a mismatch. So I would like to go beyond just extending unemployment benefits to starting a national program that really addresses our issues with this mismatch, as well as takes care of our unemployed. We took care of the banks. Why aren't we taking care of citizens?
Why is that wrong? Why is that crazy? Why will that make things worse? With deference and respect to Professor Heldman.
We want people to get reemployed. The best way to start that process is to not pay them not to work. But second, on this retraining program, we've had this for people who get displaced from international trade flows. Right. The evidence on that afterwards is they don't get a job any faster or at any higher wages than the same people who don't get the training. So the programs just don't work when the government
Isn't the evidence also, Shibani, that the longer you pay people to stay on unemployment, the longer it takes them to find a new job?
On the sidelines, 99 weeks, it is a good gig. 2 years almost, you get to sit on the sidelines. Anyone who is ambitious does not want to collect those 99 weeks. Anyone who's well trained will go out there and be able to get a job. The challenge is that we are incenting and motivating people to sit on the sidelines and say, hey, don't take the job that will actually pay the bills. Sit there, wait for something better to show up.
Carolyn, where in the Constitution is the federal government authorized to pay people not to work?
The general welfare of the American public. And again, we did bail out the banks with this unconstitutional move by the Fed and 700 billion in TARP funds. And this whole notion that this is an individual problem, it's not. We have 16 million unemployed, and that is a conservative estimate. That means it's a systemic problem. So our government needs to address the system that is creating
I don't want to
it.
get into the weeds, but if the general welfare clause of the Constitution let Congress do whatever it wanted, then we don't have a limited government, and the specific delegations to Congress and the Constitution would be meaningless.
Well, that's how everybody seems to want to interpret it when they just want to spend other people's money on programs like this. But I think the key point is here. You can talk about all the people who are unemployed, Carolyn, but more of them are going to continue to be unemployed when you pay them to be unemployed. We got to stop that process.
And the unemployment has not headed in the right
individual.
direction. We haven't seen any major substantive improvement in unemployment thanks to these unemployment benefits getting extended. There's no cause and effect that you can draw.
Go ahead, Carolyn. We have a few seconds. Why is that not true?
The cause and effect. That's not true because the unemployment rates overall have been going down and we have been extending this. Now, granted, we need better data on cause and effect, but to say it's had no effect, I think it is to mischaracterize
We got your argument. We're going to switch gears. A bill moving through Congress meant to curb rampant insider trading among our nation's lawmakers will actually make this ambiguous crime easier for them to commit. The Stock Act gives members of Congress what we as American citizens have long been denied: clear and precise guidelines for what is and what is not considered insider trading by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Meaning, Congress can continue to act without fear of prosecution while we go on living under the SEC's random and selective enforcement of insider trading. No wonder at least 140 lawmakers support the Stock Act. No wonder so many members of Congress leave far wealthier than they arrive, and they make a government salary, Ben Powell.
Yeah, they have access to information that'll let them profit, but more importantly, they can rig the rules of the game that are bad for the general welfare in order for them to profit in their portfolios. What we really want is bigger restrictions on Congress and less restrictions on other people for
Carolyn, I suspect that we are on the same page on this one. Why should the laws be written so that if you or I used insider trading that we learned about from a corporate source, we would be prosecuted? But when Congress uses insider trading about laws that they themselves are going to write or change or modify or nullify, they can make all the money they can.
Yep, that's a great point that you, Judge, and Ben just made, that they actually get to affect the outcome. And this is watered-down legislation, make no doubt about it. We're talking about there is no limitation. It allows 90 days for you to report on trades. It should be 48 hours. There's no provision for a blind trust. You can still tell your friends and family. There's no prohibition on that. I mean, this is watered-down reform.
You covered the Rajaratnam case, one of the biggest insider trading prosecutions in modern times. How the heck does he feel when a member of Congress like Denny Hastert, who'd been a high school wrestling coach his whole life, left Congress 20 years later with $10 million in the bank?
12% better per year. That's the better rate of return that Congress people make over and above what the stock markets are seeing. It's hypocritical. That's what insider traders who have been convicted of insider trading, even everyday Americans, I think, are saying of Congress people. This is hypocritical. If you can't dish it, don't dish it if you can't take it. They're sitting here getting hard-lined with hedge funds, with private equity firms saying you can't act in this way, but they themselves are falling guilty to the same
rules. We have about 30 seconds left. Why should we accept this? I thought part of the Gingrich revolution in the early 90s was that all the laws would apply to everybody.
We shouldn't accept this, but this is typical of what you get out of the criminal class in Washington, D.C. They make laws that take money away from the rest of us and give themselves special privileges to make wealth in ways that we can't.
The criminal class, that would be members of Congress.
Yes.
Carolyn Haldeman, Shabani Joshi, Ben Powell, thanks for joining us. Great group, great arguments. Will the House allow the military to detain Americans caught on U.S. soil indefinitely? Why this dreadful bill violates our most basic freedoms. Next. Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Can the Congress make legal something that is inherently wrong? And can the Congress take a freedom that is a part of our humanity and make its exercise criminal? Tonight, the Congress thinks it can write any law it wants, again. If there were no First Amendment, would we still have the freedom of speech? Well, the answer to that, like many in the law, depends on what values underlie the legal system. If the government is the source of our rights, then without the First Amendment's guarantees of free speech, any government could legally punish you for saying words and expressing thoughts that the government hated or feared. It could even silence you before you spoke. On the other hand, if our rights come from our humanity, then we would still enjoy the freedom of speech, whether it is insulated from government interference by the First Amendment or not. The wording of the First Amendment itself, however, gives us a peek at what its authors thought. They wrote that, quote, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It doesn't say that Congress shall grant freedom of speech. Rather, it prohibits Congress from interfering with it. And by referring to free speech as the freedom of speech, the drafters recognized that the freedom of speech already existed before the country that they were founding even came into existence. The same founders who drafted the First Amendment also accepted Jefferson's values articulated in the Declaration of Independence. That, quote, they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is clear beyond serious dispute, from just scratching the surface of history, that wedded to this country at its birth is the Judeo-Christian concept of the natural law. The natural law is the self-evident truth that our rights come from our humanity, that we have them by virtue of our mere existence, that they do not depend upon the government for their existence, that they do not vary as a consequence of where we are now or where our mothers were when we were born, and thus we remain fully endowed of these rights so long as we live wherever we go. If you believe that we are the present result not of a supreme being, but of natural selection, you can accept, as the founders did, that humanity, and not the government, is the repository of freedom. I suspect that most people in America, even most people around the world, accept the natural law. We have seen people in government here in America claim to accept it, yet almost as soon as they take the oath to uphold these values, they start rejecting the values. In the Patriot Act, for example, Congress made it a crime to reveal that the feds came calling on you with a search warrant in which a federal agent had authorized himself to search records that you might have. This, of course, not only violates the Fourth Amendment, which stipulates that only judges may authorize searches, it also violates the First Amendment, because it punishes speech. This week, the Congress is wrestling with more proposals that potentially violate the natural law. One of our fundamental rights is the right to be free from government restraint, absent a proven case of criminal behavior. This, too, was articulated by the framers when they wrote in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution that, quote, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This recognizes the right to be free from restraint by the government, unless the government, utilizing due process, can make out a case against you. That means a fair trial in your presence, with lawyers defending you and jurors deciding your case under the guidance of a neutral judge. Yet your representatives in Congress are about to authorize the president and all of his successors to violate your natural rights by enacting legislation that would permit American presidents to use the military to arrest Americans and restrain them without due process. Even King George III, against whose armies the colonists fought for freedom, did not have the power to do that. And just because the Congress votes to make these acts of tyranny legal, that does not mean they are constitutional. The Constitution is a higher law than anything Congress can write, and all that Congress writes must conform to it. That's why you hear me say at the beginning of each of these Freedom Watch shows the self-evident truths that the best government governs least, that you are entitled to a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution, and that the Constitution was written to keep the government from violating your natural rights. If you want to know what we can do when our natural rights are violated by the very government we have hired to protect those rights, check out my new book, It is Dangerous to Be Right When the Government is Wrong. And if you live in Iowa or New Hampshire, you can vote for the only candidate running for president who really believes that the Constitution means what it says. From New York, defending freedom every night of the week. So long, America.